Everyone thinks the funeral industry is white men in gray suits and billion-dollar public companies. Service Corporation International, Lowen Group, Stewart Enterprises, names you've never heard of, quietly burying millions of Americans a year and cashing every check. But two Black families didn't just survive in that industry, they used it as a launchpad. One turned a burial society into a $130 million empire that included a bank, a construction company, and 2 radio stations. The other turned a funeral home into a 4-generation political dynasty, so respected that a sitting president of the United States sat in their chapel to mourn a man they buried. This isn't about caskets. This is about what happens when a community locked out of every bank, every insurance company, and every hospital builds its own machine. Family 1, the Gastons, Birmingham, Alabama, 1923. A coal miner named Arthur George Gaston is watching something that breaks him a little every week. Miners die in the pits. Their widows show up at the mine gate, hat in hand, begging co-workers for spare change just to bury their husbands. Gaston starts something simple, a burial society. Members pay a quarter a week. When someone dies, the society covers the funeral. No begging, no shame, just dignity, paid for in advance. That quarter-a-week idea becomes the Booker T. Washington Burial Society, then the Booker T. Washington Insurance Company. Then, in partnership with his father-in-law, A.L. Smith, the Smith and Gaston Funeral Home, built right on the edge of Kelly Ingram Park in downtown Birmingham, the same park that would later become ground zero for civil rights marches. Here's what most people don't understand about Gaston. He didn't stop at funerals. He looked around Birmingham and asked one question over and over. What does my community need that white businesses refuse to give us? Insurance. Built it. A business school to train Black clerks and typists. Built it. The Booker T. Washington Business College. A bank because Black families couldn't get loans from white institutions? Built that too. Citizens Federal Savings and Loan, the first Black-owned financial institution in Birmingham in over 40 years. A motel because Black travelers couldn't book a room downtown. Built the A.G. Gaston Motel, which would later become the unofficial headquarters of Martin Luther King Jr. during the Birmingham campaign. By the time Gaston died in 1996 at 103 years old, his estimated net worth sat above $130 million. He'd built a savings and loan, a construction company, 2 cemeteries, 2 radio stations, and an insurance company that at its peak carried over $270 million worth of policies in force. He was, by multiple accounts, the richest Black man in America during the 1960s. But here's the part that separates Gaston from every billionaire you've heard of. When he sold his insurance company in 1987, a company worth $35 million, he didn't sell it to the highest bidder. He sold it to his 400 employees for a fraction of its value through an employee stock ownership plan. He looked at people who'd built the company with him and said, "This stays in our hands." Gaston posted King's bail twice. He gave Fred Shuttlesworth free office space to organize the movement that would desegregate Birmingham. He quietly threatened to pull his account from a whites-only bank until they removed the segregated water fountains. He did all of this while being publicly criticized by some in the movement as too cautious, too close to white business leaders, too slow to take a stand. His answer to that criticism became one of the most quoted lines in Black business history. "It doesn't do any good to arrive at first-class citizenship if you arrive broke." Gaston understood something most people miss. Power isn't just marching in the street. Power is owning the bank the marchers can borrow from. Power is owning the motel where the movement sleeps. Power is owning the funeral home that buries the fallen with dignity. Family 2, the Levys. Now travel 2 states over to Columbia, South Carolina, a different kind of empire, smaller in dollars, bigger in some ways, in reach. Isaac Samuel Levy moves to Columbia in 1907 and starts a tailoring shop, a department store. Then, in 1928, a gas station and garage. Because in his own words, nowhere in Columbia were Black entrepreneurs allowed into the filling station business. He builds his own lane. In 1932, Levy and his wife Mary open Levy's funeral home, not as a side venture, as the center of Black civic life in Columbia. The building doubles as a hub for African American voter registration and political education during Jim Crow. Levy co-founds the Columbia branch of the NAACP. He co-founds Victory Savings Bank. He co-founds the South Carolina Race Relations Commission. His funeral home is listed for years in the Negro Motorist Green Book, not because it pumped gas anymore, but because it was still a place Black travelers passing through Columbia knew they could trust. This is the difference between Gaston and Levy. Gaston built an empire that stretched into banking, real estate, and media. The Levys built something narrower and, arguably, more permanent, an unbroken chain of ownership. No sale, no corporate buyout, no employee stock plan needed, because it never left the family in the first place. In 1995, the founder's grandson, I.S. Levy Johnson, becomes sole owner. He remodels the funeral home, refurbishes the family's Lincoln Cemetery, modernizes the fleet. His son, Reverend Chris Levy Johnson, takes up the mantle after him. 4 generations, nearly a century. Still family-run, still on Taylor Street. And in 2015, that legacy collides with American history in a way nobody could have scripted. When Reverend Clementa Pinckney, the pastor and state senator murdered in the Charleston church massacre, needed to be laid to rest, it was Levy's funeral home that handled his homegoing. President Barack Obama sat in that service, delivered the eulogy, and led the country in singing Amazing Grace, ended up hosting a sitting president of the United States 90 years later. 2 families, 2 different playbooks. Gaston scaled sideways. Funeral money became bank money, became media, money became civil rights money, until the empire touched almost every part of Black economic life in Birmingham. The Levys scaled down instead of out. One institution, refined over 4 generations until it became something money can't buy. The trust of an entire community, generation after generation, at the exact moment they needed it most. Neither family got there by accident. Both of them looked at an industry nobody else wanted, the industry of grief, of loss, of the one thing every human being eventually needs, and turned it into permanence, into land, into banks, into buildings that are still standing with the same family name on the door, decades after the men who founded them are gone. That's the real lesson hiding in plain sight. The people who build generational wealth aren't always the ones chasing the flashiest industry. Sometimes they're the ones who find the deepest, most overlooked need in their community and refuse to let anyone else own the answer to it. If this kind of story means something to you, the quiet empires, the ones history almost forgot, make sure you're subscribed, because we're going to keep digging up the ones nobody else is telling you about.